Hello, grade 12s. Welcome to today's lesson. It's economics with Ms. Piwe. And in this lesson, we will be focusing on the cost-based analysis. I know this is probably your favorite topic because I know that it gets examined quite often in the matric paper. So it's important for us to go over this concept and to have a fair understanding of how it works and the functions of cost-based analysis as well. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So we're looking at the cost-based analysis, also known as the CBA. Very important concept in economics. There are questions asked. I came across a question in the past paper that was asking why would government go ahead to build a project after they've established that the costs involved are higher and also, they don't have maybe the sufficient budget to carry on the task, but there's such a huge need and value in doing that project. So the social benefits will be considered more, or they'll be weighted more than the private costs involved in making that project possible. So government could carry on even though they don't have a suitable budget to complete the task, but they would look at the value that the project will bring into society. So it's important that we understand all those issues. So let's begin by explaining what cost-benefit analysis is all about. So I'm going to start with the description. So let's go through it. So in both private and public sectors, project evaluations are done. Okay, so you know that we've learned about the private sector and the public sector. We know that private sector is made up of private businesses and individual firms, and also the public sector is managed by government, and you also find the state enterprises which are part of the public sector. So in both the private and the public sector, project evaluations get done because you don't just wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to build a bridge. A lot of work and planning needs to go into that, and all sorts of costs need to be considered before the project is developed. So we know that project evaluations need to happen or they get done. In terms of cost, because cost is important, and also the benefits, how would the public benefit from that project? So we're spending over 20 billion rand developing this particular project. What are the benefits? Do the benefits equal to the amount of money that is spent on that project? So that also needs to be considered. So we're looking at cost, but also benefits are considered. And then also we need to know that in the private sector, a feasibility study is done, and also it provides the legal aspects relating to the externalities. So we know that a feasibility study shows whether a project or something is feasible, is doable, in other words. So they will consider all the costs that are involved. Sometimes it's too expensive to develop a project, and government will need to increase the tax rates to businesses and to private households in order to manage to have that money in order to develop the project. So it's important that a feasibility study is done in order to establish, are we in a good financial position in order to carry out that project. In the past, we've seen that projects that are not assessed properly tend to fail, or they remain incomplete because not enough planning had gone into ensuring that all the proper structures are in place in order for the project to be completed. Think of the RDP houses, the hype in the early 90s, the excitement that got created, that people will finally be homeowners, and then there were tender systems which were issued out, and the tender system was new in our country. And a lot of people tendered for those projects to build the RDP houses. But government incurred a lot of troubles with that particular project because what they did, they paid people up front, or the construction companies up front. And then, the building will start, you'll see the foundation being developed. But then, the building then stops, and people are excited and they want to move into these houses, but they can't. So a proper feasibility study was not done. They didn't consider issues like, what if these people spend the money and they do not continue or do not complete the project, So now the tendering system has been reviewed and you are paid in percentages. So you start the job with your own money, and once you've completed phase A, then they will pay you for phase A. And then you will start phase B. And then once you've completed that, then you'll be paid for that. So that ensures that the construction companies that develop buildings and houses actually do complete their jobs. So all that would be part of the feasibility study, looking at possibilities of completing the task. And obviously, when you look at possibilities, you also look at challenges that you are most likely to encounter in the building process. So that needs to be considered as well. Then the expected private costs and benefits are taken into account. So we would look at the private costs and the benefit of that project. So both the private costs and benefits will be taken into account when the decision gets made in terms of the feasibility of the project. So in the public sector, a cost-based analysis is done, which takes into account expected social costs and social benefits of providing such goods and services. Okay. So we know that in the public sector, particularly, a cost-based analysis gets conducted in order to establish what the social cost and the social benefits would be of providing such a good or service. So we perform what we call a cost-based analysis over here. So what are the reasons for the cost benefit analysis? Okay, so the first point, it's market signals. For example, price help to allocate resources through demand and supply. Okay, so we would have to consider the price, because if we look at the price, then we will be able to allocate our limited resources or the resources that we have at our disposal in order to ensure that they meet the benefits or they help in completing the project. And then this will be done through demand and supply. So the market forces play an important role in this. So it's not influenced by a private individual or firm or business, but it's influenced by the forces of supply and demand, which is a good thing, because we've just spent a bit of time in the previous lessons looking at the market structures, looking at perfect competition and so on. And we say it's important, it's always a good thing when the forces of supply and demand actually determine the allocation of resources, and particularly also the price involved in that. Then also goods supplied by the government, such as roads, bridges, and etc., are provided free. So we call these infrastructure because they help even private businesses in order to conduct their business, because you can't deliver if you don't have a road. You can't take your stock from the warehouse into your supermarket if you don't have the roads and the bridge that the driver needs to cross in order to reach your target market. So government plays an important role in developing the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is very important in the whole holistic approach of achieving economic growth, because without the proper infrastructure, then we will be hampered in a way when it comes to providing or growing our economy and providing the goods and services that our consumers need. So that also helps. And then with the absence of market signals, decisions on the desirability of a project may be subjective. Okay, so we know that the market signals are important. We are referring to the supply and demand that we mentioned over here. So in the absence of the market signals, then we need to be subjective in terms of making decisions on whether to go ahead with the project or not. Because it does happen that at times we can't rely on the market forces, and then we have to make that call in order to ensure that we provide the goods and services that the consumers and households need. Also, moving right along, we know that the objective criteria may be required to ensure economic efficiency in resource allocation. Remember, it's important that we consider resource allocation because economics is all about that. The fact that we have limited resources and unlimited wants and needs. So we have to work with the limited resources that we've got at our disposal in order to make sound economic decisions. So if we don't allocate our resources accordingly, then we are going to find ourselves in trouble. Hence, with those projects that were incomplete, in most cases, it was because the resources were not allocated accordingly, and hence the construction companies and the government officials that were running those projects, find themselves in that awkward situation where they have to go back and look at resource allocation. So it's important that we ensure that there is proper resource allocation in order for economic efficiency to take place, because without the proper allocation of resources, we are not going to meet the objective of achieving economic efficiency. Cost-based analysis brings greater objectivity to decision making. Okay, so because you have done a study, you have analyzed the project, you've done evaluations, you have chatted to people that specialize in those particular industries, civil engineers and all that. So they are going to give you information, and because they are going to be objective in the process, because they are a whole lot of issues that need to be considered, from safety, we don't want a bridge that's going to fall down after 2 years. So you need to take their recommendations into account when making that final decision. If they say, hang on, the project cannot carry on because of A, B, and C, then that decision needs to be respected, and a plan B needs to be put together in order to ensure that those recommendations that were made are incorporated in the project. So it's important that all stakeholders remain objective in the process, and the cost-based analysis helps us in order to achieve this. Right, let's move on. So this is done by identifying all the relevant benefits and costs of a project, so that an informed decision can be made. Okay, so a study has been done, so a feasibility study has been done. So you've looked at all the costs that you are going to incur in making this project possible. But also it's important to consider the social benefits that the project will bring to the larger community, so that the community enjoys that facility that's built within the community. So benefits also need to be considered, but costs obviously are a main factor. So sometimes the costs could be quite high, but the benefits also of having that project could also be high. So the government will obviously look at the benefits, because they need to deliver infrastructure to the greater community, and therefore they will continue with the project. And what I like about this particular point that we have just made is that informed decisions need to be made. Because economics is all about that, making those sound decisions that we can actually, if we were held accountable to say, why did you make that decision? Then we can use economic reasoning in order to support why we have made that particular decision. So it's important that we use the costs and the benefits and take the recommendations based on the feasibility study that was conducted, and then also use that in order to make the informed decisions in building a project. Okay, so moving right along. Okay, so now applying the cost-based analysis. So this is an example, because it's always good to apply the information. It's all good to know the content, but in most cases you will be required to apply the information that you've learned in class or in this lesson. So let's use this example. So cost-based analysis is usually applied to projects where it is expected there will be a significant difference in private and social costs and benefits. So imagine the Gautrain project, a rail service that connects Hatfield in Tshwane with Johannesburg and also with OR Tambo International Airport. Okay, so we know that the Gautrain was one of the biggest projects that we've seen in our country. It was all like, quite an exciting development leading to the World Cup, that we will finally have this underground train and also bring that experience that people in the UK have, people in London have, and in New York and in China as well. So it was very exciting. But there were a lot of people that were very skeptical about this project. People that didn't feel that we have the resources and also the expertise in order to make this project possible. And I know to a lot of us, it all sounded like a dream, like, that will never happen. A train, traveling underground, and it takes you 15 to 20 minutes or to get to Pretoria from Johannesburg, and so on, at 15 minutes to the airport from Sandton. So it was like, what is this? Not possible. And now we're in a situation where we are using the facility, and there are plans to extend the routes to other parts of the country and also of Johannesburg. So it's important. So this was a big project. It wasn't something that they could decide on overnight. So a lot of studies had to be done in terms of feasibility, the cost of this project, but also the social benefits that this project will bring to the community. And then also take the recommendations that were made by the civil engineers that were appointed to conduct the feasibility study in this project, and take those recommendations and then bring them back and then use them to make informed decisions whether to carry on with this project or not. Okay, so then they made the decision that there are more social benefits to this. The project costs a lot of money, and therefore they had to consider that or take that into account. So it's important that we consider that as well. But then the social benefits obviously were greater than the costs that were involved. People wanted this need because of the traffic between Johannesburg and Pretoria. So they knew that this service would really help them in getting to their destinations much faster. So before we continue with applying the cost-based analysis, let's take a short break, and I will see you right after this.